Hello there, and welcome to Gooner U Film Studies, where there are no degrees because the learning never stops. I'm Dove, an adjunct professor here in the Film Studies department, and my friend Keith is our stalwart distinguished professor of Arsenal and Football Studies. During our regular Gooner U episodes, we cover the past week's events in Arsenal, Premier League, and other soccer topics. But during our Film Studies episodes, we discuss a film from the annals of soccer film history and share our insights about film, history, and our knowledge of the beautiful game. This week, we watched 1995's family comedy, The Big Green. This is a Disney one. What do you think of it, Keith?
Well, first off, I just want to thank you for continuing to indulge my childhood nostalgia of sports movies from the mid-90s. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, nostalgia for you, first-time viewings for me. This is another one that I had not seen before we watched it for this show. So.
Yeah. So I think this one, obviously coming at this from the memory perspective, I think this one for me suffers slightly because it is so connected in ways we'll probably come up and mention to so many of the other family-friendly sports movies that came out in this era, including several of whom starred actors that are in this movie as well.
Right.
But overall, actually, I came away liking it. I don't want to say better than I remembered, but certainly coming away from it, having enjoyed it on its own merits. Beyond just the nostalgia factor, coming away from it, that was actually a pretty solid kids movie.
Yeah, I mean, so I didn't have nostalgia to compare against. All I had was kind of the reasons in the back of my head that I'd never seen the movie before now. Having been a fan of The Mighty Ducks and The Sandlot and other similar movies from the time, this one fell through the cracks. I think it was just... I didn't see it when it was new. My parents didn't care to show it to us, which, it was a lot harder seeing movies in the 90s. Today, any kid who has the slightest interest in soccer, it's 2 clicks away on Disney+. If you missed it in the theater and your parents didn't want to buy the VHS tape, it was pretty much out of reach. So it just kind of missed me that way. And then as far as why I haven't watched it, like with my son, who, I share some love of soccer with, I don't share all my love of soccer with him. He's working his way there in his own time. Yeah. But why have I not shown him yet? Well, it kind of looked dumb. Like the cover didn't look like it was a movie that I would like. The opening graphic and the first 5 minutes on their backs with Cheetos on their bellies did not dissuade me. And the sped up scene of her hosing them off, I thought that I was in for a really rough hour and a half or so. Mm. But it changed my mind about the movie very quickly. I did come around before long and was really enjoying it. And I think this overall, I've also, as I think about Kicking and Screaming more and more parts of it kind of replay in my head and I relate to it more and more as time goes on, Kicking and Screaming is kind of working its way up in my estimation also. But right off the bat, off first viewing, I would say I liked this more than I liked that.
Yeah, I mean, I do think this does suffer. I mean, you threw out The Mighty Ducks. We could talk about Angels in the Outfield. We could talk about The Sandlot. We could talk about... there's a couple of the baseball movie, Kids in Baseball, Rookie of the Year, Little Big League. I mean, there's a lot of these kind of ones that come out. And to me, this one kind of came sort of after the crest of the wave. And you can sort of, it pales in comparison to the greats that came before it. Or it doesn't say it pales, but you can see the cracks in the foundation. They're kind of, I don't want to say running out of ideas. And so when you think about it, having come after some of these really great, really good ones, yeah, it's going to suffer a little bit, but as we step away or think about it just on its own terms, it's the kind of one you can look back and say, that was pretty darn good. That was a pretty solid run.
Yeah, it was. It's funny. So it came out just a few years after Ladybugs and then 10 years before Kicking and Screaming. And it's funny how much is really similar between all three of those movies. One thing kind of summed up to me by a line from the character Newt, who that actor Bug Hall, he's adorable on screen. He played Alfalfa, I believe, in The Little Rascals also, which came out the year before. Mm-hmm. So he's about the same age. In this movie, he's just adorable, and my 8-year-old son was saying the same thing. I watched this one with him, and that kid, like, he could do anything, and like you just go like, oh shucks, like isn't that cute? He could like blow up a car, and like, oh look at him, that's the cutest time I've ever seen a car blow up. But that didn't happen in this movie. A lot of other stuff, but but anyway, so he had a line toward the beginning of the movie when the coach is trying to get him onto a team. What's soccer anyway? And that to me kind of epitomizes a lot of the interest in why this and Ladybugs were probably made in the first place back then. Is soccer as a concept was kind of new to a lot of America. It was something that hadn't been played yet, or at least not seriously. Like, no one thought of it as like, oh, when I grow up, I'm gonna be a soccer player. It was like, yeah, it's a way for your parents to get you out of the house and tired for running around the field for a couple hours. And that was basically it. But yeah, it's interesting seeing how soccer is portrayed in these movies. Yeah,
and it does speak to me as sort of thinking about sort of the dichotomy of where soccer was. Because on the one hand, there is that sense of foreignness to it. Soccer was played by immigrants and foreigners and Spanish speakers. It was not American in that sense. It was something very foreign and very different. On the other hand, it was fairly big in like suburban middle class towns. Like, they were pretty developed leagues, and lots of gear available. I mean, gear like for youth players, not branded jerseys from big clubs, but there was a lot of that available. I remember 95, you're just coming off of the 94 World Cup. You're also you're a year away from the launch of Major League Soccer in 1996. So you're in kind of this moment where soccer is it's having a moment in America. But they do kind of play with that a little bit, because on the one hand, soccer is, and I know we'll get into this a little later. On the one hand, it's somewhat very foreign, right? It's the English-speaking teacher who introduces it to them by juggling a globe in the classroom, and that's just seen. How did you do that? Right? It seems very strange and foreign, because she's English, of course, and then of course, who's the best player on the team? Well, he's the pseudo South American. Or Central America. I think there's like Guatemala,
El Salvador.
El Salvador. Yeah. So, but he's Latin American. He's from somewhere else. But on the other hand, right? They pack up, and where do they go for their games? They go to Austin, Texas.
Right.
And they play again. I mean, that the Knights are just the one example. The sort of the bad guy team. Like, those kids are pretty serious. Like, they've got nice jerseys. Like, they've got a huge fan base, which is a little weird, but they've got a pretty impressive. The championship game is played in it's got two-sided stands. They've got a broadcaster. I don't know what he was. That was always an odd choice.
Yeah, that was actually listed. That was listed in the IMDb goofs as like, there's no live commentary on the field during soccer games.
Or any sport for that matter. But yeah, but
sort of with baseball, you'll announce the player who's coming up to bat and things like that. That's probably what they were trying to make it feel like more.
No, they needed somebody to narrate what was happening. That's what it was, a conceit to narrate the action on the field. But I mean, you think about that. Like, that stuff existed in certain areas in certain neighborhoods, and you saw that they were. I mean, they were all white kids they were playing, right? I mean, this was a sport. It was very popular amongst a certain amount of middle and upper middle class white kids, as you talked about, for letting their kids run around until they got into a real sport later on. But there's still a level of seriousness, for the competition at that level. Which is kind of interesting, that you could have these two kinds of things as something that is very foreign, and it also represents something that's very American at the same time. I find that sort of a little bit fascinating to sort of watch. Because I do think in a lot of ways those things have kind of merged in a lot of important ways these days, which is good for the game.
That also manifests in this movie of just how foreign Elma, Texas, which we were talking about before the show, that's a fictional place. It isn't a real town, or even apparently a real county in Texas. But so this fictional town that's located, driving distance from Austin, described at various times in the beginning of the movie as either like a million miles away, or, it's not that far, depending on who they were trying to convince that they wanted to do it or not to do it. But Elma felt like a third world country, and in many ways was, compared to what we know Austin and other similar cities to be like. And that's at least part of it. Like they were almost in their own country at that point.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's worth pointing out. Obviously, as we said, Elma, Texas is not real. Neither is Lane County. They're both fake. But I mean, they do represent that kind of Texas small town that, in some ways, I mean, even in the '90s, we're having this conversation of a town that's sort of left behind in certain ways, right? I mean, they're shot at glory. That the Billboard there, they won the state title in football in the '70s,
right?
And this came out 5 years after the book version of Friday Night Lights, the famous retelling of the Odessa Permian Panthers high school football team, and about a decade before the movie starring Billy Bob Thornton. Shortly afterwards was the TV show, which are both pretty great in their own ways. But sort of that sense of the high school football and the idea of the faded glory of the town. Like you can see a lot of the buildings there, and they're kind of run down, like they used to be something, and now they're kind of not. And the one of them who is, the coach of the Knights there, he got out. He left.
Right.
And he
became an IRS auditor.
An IRS auditor, yeah. Which, let's be honest, those have never been well loved, which,
no. That was funny.
But it's just but to me, that's just sort of it was really interesting in a lot of those ways. And again, even just, I mean, this movie's now 30 years old, and looking at the way they depict Austin. I mean, Austin has exploded in the last 30 years. But they do have a couple shots of the skyline. I mean, that is Austin, Texas. I mean, you can see, at least in one shot, the state capitol. I'm pretty sure the tower at the University of Texas. So, like, they are in Austin, and Austin has Austin has grown substantially. So even they've kind of experienced that kind of boom in a lot of ways, which in some ways has actually been a lot of people from the small towns coming into the city, as well as people from across the country coming into Texas as well. But that's a Texas history story, which I know we're here more to talk about soccer than the great state of Texas.
Yeah. So it was interesting looking at it from that point of view. And, you talk about the foreign nature of it. I mean, in this movie, compared to the others, we have an actual foreign character that brings soccer to these kids, right? You have the English teacher who's supposed to only be spending a semester there, but we get the feeling by the end of the movie is probably never leaving.
Because sure, you have an exchange program.
That did not make sense. And if they did, why on earth would they send her there?
Yeah, how did Elma, Texas get in on this? Anyway,
yeah,
who did they send over? Good Lord.
But yeah, so as soon as, by the way, Olivia Dabo, apparently a secret Brit. I didn't know before this movie that she was British. But
her most famous role was as the older sister in The Wonder Years. There's a classic sitcom of the mid to late 80s.
Right, where she was a flower child and very much American.
Yes.
Yeah, that was the only thing I'd known her from before this.
Long tradition of British actors pretending to be American.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those shows that I listen to refers to a secret Brit, where you'll just think that they're American until all of a sudden you hear them speaking in an interview someplace, and like, I didn't know that.
My favorite version of that is Idris Elba, who's an Arsenal fan, so connecting there. But one of his first big roles in America is on the TV show The Wire, about drug dealers in Baltimore. And if that's the first thing you've ever seen him in, you would swear that he was from South Baltimore, that he was from Baltimore. Yeah. He had whatever that accent is, he had it. And then you meet him, and he's there. You see him in an interview, and he's from London. He's a very British.
He's always been a kind of controversial name tossed out there as like the next James Bond, and maybe too old for that now. But yeah, it's
there's another interesting bit in there. The sort of the main one, to the extent there is a main character, is a Detective McNulty, who I cannot think of the life of me the name of the actor. But he's also British, and he plays this tough, streetwise Baltimore cop who has to pretend to be English in a certain scene, and actually does a fake British accent, which is awful. Oh, it's fantastic. It's great.
Boy, but yeah, it's like a secret Brit double agent.
Again, this is one you're going to watch without your children around. The scene involved, but shout out to The Wire, fantastic show. But also,
high on my list to catch up on. Yeah.
Yes, it's worth it. To say that. But anyway, back to 90s kids movies, family movie. I think it's fair to say. I mean, I asked, how are we distinguishing between a family movie and a kids movie? Or maybe we should save this. We can save this for a little later in the show, but it's an interesting distinction: kids movie versus a family movie. And
so, yeah, something to think about. And I agree, we can return to that. And yeah, I would say this is somewhere in between those two. But yeah, so getting back to like kind of Ladybugs Kicking and Screaming, comparing these. So one thing that all of them have in common is a team that's not very good. And all of a sudden, you add one player, or in Kicking and Screaming, a pair of players that come as a set. You add them to the team, and boom, all of a sudden, you're winning every game, right? Which was something, as we watched those last two movies, I kind of laughed at. And I was like, okay, sure, I guess it just makes narrative convenient sense. But oh my gosh, I saw this play out in my actual rec soccer team this past fall, where we had two kids who were good and definitely carried the team the whole season. And the only game we lost was when one of those two kids wasn't there. So yeah, it's very much a real thing. I don't turn my nose up at that idea as much as I did the last time around.
I mean, there's a lot of ways, there's a lot of elements of as players move up in levels, the big difference isn't their skill and ability, it's the mental factor of how do you handle the fact that you're not the best player on the field anymore. Or that you're not the only one who's any good. And the guys who end up really making it to the highest levels are the ones who are able to adapt their game to that. And there are plenty throughout. And sometimes it doesn't even happen until they reach the professional level. But by the time you get there, you have to handle the fact that you're not the best player on the field by a wide margin. And, mentally, how do you deal with that? Right. And that's an interesting sort of stretch. But yes, especially at the youth level, one good player can pretty much make a team. I mean, you can go a long way with one kid who's really good.
Yeah. So in Kicking and Screaming, we had the Italians. In this movie, this was an interesting choice where you're right. Like, you could tell, like, so as soon as the principal walks in and introduces this new kid as Juan Morales, I was like, oh, okay, really? Like, I have to imagine a lot of Texas, especially anywhere at all. Austin isn't like a border town. It's not very far from the border, and you have to have some familiarity with Spanish, I'd imagine, even in the 90s. But you would think that seemed kind of bothered me too. But I mean, they are depicting them as being in rural Texas, and I mean, I not going to name names, but definitely heard somebody here who has lived a long time in Texas refer to someone's last name as Ramirez. Okay.
So I can't say that that's entirely outside. It's not as far out of the question as I would like it to be, all things considered. Okay. You're right. It is obviously played up for the foreignness act,
Yeah. But it is funny. So it is funny though with his character. So you're right. Like, they want him to be the South American kid, and as soon as they introduce him, I'm thinking, oh, okay, that's who he's going to be in this movie, and he does serve that role. But then they like fill in later on, oh, by the way, for reasons to help us make our political argument, he wasn't raised in El Salvador. He was raised in El Paso, and they just play soccer a lot in El Paso.
which is 100% true. I mean, like, yeah. and El Paso is a border city, and there's a lot of that kind of people from both sides of the border there.
Right.
So in a sense, El Paso is kind of the perfect choice. Now, again, that goes now. This kind of goes to the interesting thing about when you watch it. When I watched that movie in the mid 90s, El Paso was just some city somewhere over there. It's Spanish, so okay, I guess it must have a lot of Spanish people. Now, of course, having lived in Texas as long as I have, I've been to El Paso. Very different than the rest of Texas. It's in the Mountain Time Zone. So you know that. It's also about a 10 hours drive from here. The state's enormous. It's crazy.
I remember my dad telling me when he drove my sister from Arlington to LA, the halfway point in that trip was still in Texas and probably somewhere near Amarillo or El Paso.
I had not Amarillo. No, you can go further than that. No, I had a friend who drove from Fort Worth to Pasadena when TCU played in the Rose Bowl, and it was a 2-day drive, and they spent the night in El Paso. That's the halfway point between Fort Worth, Dallas, Fort Worth, around Arlington, that area, the Metroplex, and then to LA was El Paso.
But yeah. So they introduce him, and, again, for political motivation on the part of the screenwriters, his mother doesn't want him to play for the team at first, and, whatever. But it was fun the way that they got him into playing. Like that whole exchange was fun where, you had the one kid kind of like treating him like, oh, well, you don't even look like an athlete. Of course, it's like the chubbiest kid in this town is like saying that he doesn't even look like an athlete, right? And all of a sudden he's like proud of what a good goalie he is when all we've seen him do is not move a muscle as the ball is being kicked toward him to that point. But that was fun where he showed what he can do, and
We should point out the character in question is played by Patrick Reno, most famous for the role of Ham Porter from The Sandlot, who played essentially a fat kid in most of these movies. That was one of his roles. So,
yep. Exactly. Yeah. So he was in both of those, and I think The Sandlot had come out a couple of years before. He looked noticeably older in this.
Yeah. But I do think there's something I like about this, which we didn't get as much in Kicking and Screaming, because it is a little bit more of a movie about the adults than it is the kids. And obviously Ladybugs, because that movie really is about the adults and not really about the kids. But I do get, like, kids aren't necessarily... Kids are complicated. Like, these kids can be very mean to each other, but also very nice. Like, it was kind of interesting to see them run that emotional gamut between one another. And that sense of they can give each other stick. They can make fun of each other or tease each other, and then suddenly find out the things you learn. Sometimes, as they say, your mouth wrote checks your body couldn't cash. Like you picked a fight with a guy who you really shouldn't have.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. While we're talking about Patrick Renna's character, Larry, the goalie, what did you think of the interludes with his visions of, like, it in the beginning? It was the literal knights, like, chasing after him where they're wearing all their armor but still the Adidas cleats, and then it gets like more and more ridiculous and potentially disassociated from the name of the team that they're even facing off against. What did you think of that whole thread?
I enjoyed that. I thought it was a kind of an interesting sort of bit. I mean, first off, I having played in that era, ninjas, pirates, Vikings. I think I played on a team that was called the Cobras one year. That was just kind of how you named teams. It was something that was cool. I mean, let's be honest, ninjas are cool, right? Vikings, cool. Night, you picked something that was cool and you just sort of went with it. So that I thought that was actually a pretty interesting conceit. Especially the way they are. It provides him, I think, with the character arc to get you to the end of the movie when he's able to overcome his fears, right? He's able to get past that. And I thought it was a really interesting way to do it. Like, make put yourself in it. So, like, don't be afraid of it. Make yourself a part of it. How it ends up getting transferred to the other player is a fascinating thing that I'll never understand. But
I was going to say the same thing. That was a choice.
And that's one too. In a sense, I guess that one of the things that's kind of interesting is, and maybe we can talk about why this is. I thought the villains were slightly undercooked. Like, there's nothing outside of the one instance where they're making fun of the other team in their first game, right? They're playing with some girls, the nothings from nowhere. The kids on the Knights don't really do anything.
That's true.
It's the coach who's the villain. And in a sense, like, I don't even get the sense that he's... Again, my point of comparison is sort of the obsessive, win-at-all-costs youth coach that you see in so many of the others. Obviously, Kicking and Screaming is one example. The one I'm thinking of is from the Mighty Ducks. Was it was it Riley? It's not worth winning if you can't win big. Like that kind of win at all costs. I think you've watched Cobra Kai, right? And the series recently ended, and of course they sort of the classic strike first, strike hard, no mercy.
Right.
Sweep the leg. That kind of attitude, and he's just kind of a jerk. Like he's not like an evil coach who have his team cheat to win. He seems like he's just, maybe
for the most part, like when he kind of tries to get the kid deported. Yeah. That's the worst thing that he does. Yeah.
Right. But other than that, but you could, in a sense, it seems that his biggest villainy is the fact that he left Elma. And he's kind of a jerk. IRS, we know he's the IRS auditor, and he's obviously very condescending to everyone else, including Steve Guttenberg.
And Olivia Dabo, like the first words he says to her are "va va vu."
Yeah. Hey man, it was okay. First off, I can't say I disagree. Secondly, it was the '90s. You kind of go with it. I mean, see again, point of comparison. He was in the same year. I look at him and I just see Ranch Wilder, voice of the Angels from Angels in the Outfield. He was the kind of jerkish radio broadcaster who gets fired at the end. Spoiler alert for a 30-year-old movie. I'm sorry.
We won't blow the spoiler horn since that's a different movie. Yeah, that's one I know I had seen that at least once or twice as a kid, and I really remember it like almost not at all now. But yeah.
Which, by the way, you want a fun thing to do? Look at that cast list. There are 2 Oscar winners who play bit parts on the Angels.
Huh.
There's your trivia question. Let's see if you can figure it out by the end of the show. The 2 actors who play bit parts on the Angels roster and Angels in the Outfield.
That's funny. Yeah, I'm already trying.
You're already looking it up.
The IMDb list. There's no way I'm going to guess it cold. It'd be hard enough for me to guess it just looking. Oh well, okay. Yeah, I mean now I'm seeing some names.
Right. Yeah.
Adrian Brody obviously would be one of them.
Yep.
But yeah. Matthew McConaughey hasn't won an Oscar, has he?
Yes, yeah. Dallas
really?
Buyers Club, yeah. Adrian Brody and Matthew
Dallas Buyers Club, yeah, I forgot about that. Okay,
Adrian Brody and Matthew McConaughey both have like 2 lines in the whole movie. That cast is just bonkers. That's such a good, and it's a good movie too. Anyway,
I should see that again. I'll put that on our list to watch again.
Absolutely.
We rewatched Rookie of the Year recently, so yeah, that was better than I remembered it.
But yeah, I did think it was kind of interesting. They were like, so to get us back to where we were with this, right? It's the keeper sees it's the coach's son, but like, other than the fact he says he's the coach says that's my son.
Right.
There's like, there's nothing else to his character at all. He's the best player, but like,
right.
Just be, okay, he's the best player on the bad guys team and they wear black, but like, they don't come off as being like cartoonishly evil, which on the one hand I kind of like. I guess it's kind of it's easy to sort of make the other kids like cartoon bad guys, but I kind of like that they were, in a sense, because they're almost so nondescript. Like,
right,
the movie is almost entirely about the big green. It's really about it's like it's self-referential. It's about us. Yeah,
and it focuses on them and their development more than the external bad guys that they have to defeat. Yeah. But yeah, it's that is different. That does distinguish it from other similar movies. Yeah, because we did see in both of those other ones where you'd have like caricatures that they'd play against, and like Ladybugs had a few different ones that were like caricatures in different ways. And the one that this team came closest to remind me of was the one team that was run like the military, where it's like drop and give me 20, like that kind of training regimen.
Yeah, and you get a sense of. I mean, the point I read is they've got the nice manicured field, they've got the stadium set up basically, but they also like run drills. Like they show up there and like he blows the whistle and they run the next drill. They blow the because they have this routine worked out for themselves. And of course, our kids show up and are like, so I guess we're going to play. Like and it's one thing that does it must be so hard to pull off in a kids movie because you have to exaggerate the differences in abilities, because otherwise that's where the dramatic arc comes from. Of course, is the kids who learn how to play the game. You can't do that with adults movies. Even like I'm thinking about a movie like Major League, where like they're comically bad, but they're also all professional baseball players. They just have like major holes in their game. Whereas here, like half the kids like miss the ball when they swing and try to kick it. Like, there's a comical level of comical badness to them. But you almost wonder, how bad can they be on screen to heighten the contradiction, right? Well, at the same time, not making them so bad that like, no, this is like an actual danger to them to be on the field with this.
Right.
I remember I watched the remake or the new series, the Mighty Ducks that Disney put out on Disney Plus.
I haven't seen that yet. Yeah.
And they start with like the kids who sort of become the Ducks, like they can't skate.
Yeah.
Which is problem and like decidedly unsafe, which again, of course, this is me saying this now, on the edge of 40, as opposed to when I watched that movie and I was 10. But, there's that. It's
in the original, they could mostly skate.
Yeah, they were bad at it.
Yeah.
And they were obviously very poor. Their socioeconomic status was a big part of that. But
poor at hockey and outside of hockey.
Right. And sort of the same thing too. And sort of the same thing here too with this team. I mean, in a lot of ways they're bad because they've never played before. They don't really know what they're doing. And you can sort of see, okay, like let's run some drills, let's do some things, like let's actually, have a training montage. And as any, and that's how you get better in any movie, right?
Montage.
Exactly. And so you kind of wonder where that gap is. Like how are they? They're bad so that they can get blown out in the opening game by the bad guys. Right. But they're not so bad that you're like, no, seriously, like what are they doing? How are they? Is that safe for them to be out there?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, were they ever really that bad when they end up showing the record by the end of the season? So they make it into the final with 8 wins, 2 losses, and 1 draw. I mean, that is a pretty damn good record by the end of the movie.
Good. Yeah. It was kind of interesting. They didn't even bother with a playoff system. They just kind of were like, oh, I guess it was the top 2 teams.
They showed, yeah.
Now I'm curious, what is this league structure? Like, how many teams are in this? Like, is it a home and away? Do they even have a home field? I don't know.
They let the GOAT decide.
I need backstory.
Yeah. So, it was another source of when I watch these movies, sometimes I take away some ideas for things that I would like to try jokingly or seriously with my own teams that I coach. And a couple that I noted earlier on were, I need to remember the phrase zip it midgets. I think that's good. Especially if there's one kid in zip it midget, the rhyming, I like that a little bit more than zip it midgets, but I'll take it either way. Also,
I don't know. Olivia Diabo got really mad at him for saying that. And
I think that was her, like, showing that she could agree with both like him and the kids. Like that was something that she took the kids' side against him. Like, okay, stop saying that. But then she also agreed with him that, I forget what they were arguing about at that point. But so anyway, so I once or twice I'll see if I can work that into the repertoire. My team last season didn't really need to be told to zip it very often, but I've had other teams that have. Along those lines, what the coach of the Knights used in almost every practice and game that looks ridiculous on screen, you kind of make fun of him for it, probably at least in your head. But I can absolutely see the use for it, and I would if I weren't worried about getting like kicked out of a league for using it. Was a megaphone. Like, honestly, like my throat ends up getting raw by the end of a soccer game because you can't hear more than like 15 to 20 feet away. Like your voice is just lost in the wind and they can't hear you at all. That is definitely something that if I weren't embarrassed to try using it would actually be very helpful in practice.
Yeah, I in practice, I can see the value of it just in terms of making sure you can be heard. During the game, it's a little ridiculous. And in fact, the referee would probably tell you to put it away.
Probably.
But I during a practice, it depends how much space you're working with and like how big the field is. I mean, depending on how long you end up doing this, through your son and how far he goes. I mean, you start getting into like late middle school and you're talking full size fields. I mean,
right.
That's a lot of space. At the youth level, obviously they're much smaller, but he's not far away from some substantially more space they're playing on, and it's going to require a little more in the way of voice.
Yeah. So one last training tip that I really liked is you mentioned their training montage, and I saw what they were doing toward the end when they were doing the sit-ups, and at the peak of the sit-up, there was someone at their feet who would like toss them the ball, and then the person doing the sit-up would like head it back to the person who tossed it. I think that's a great idea. Get a little bit of fitness in there and working on the heading. Yeah. Yeah.
I've seen that one a little bit. I wonder how that, in the age of concussions, how that one plays in people's minds and its acceptability. You do want to be careful that the kids are sort of tossing it at them softly as opposed to throwing it at them.
So I'm glad you brought up the safety issue around headers, because that is one thing that is interesting watching this movie. Is a couple goals we see scored were from like corner kicks or other crosses that got headed into the goal, and they show the kids heading the ball, and that is definitely not allowed until I think maybe even after middle school. Like I think it's not until you're in like high school, secondary school in the US where they're actually allowed to even head the ball. And it's not out of concern of the ball hitting your head too hard, because if you're heading the ball, it's on purpose and you're not really going to get hurt. We know where concussions really come from is the attempt to head the ball and two heads hitting into each other. And that's where the real danger is. And that's why heading isn't allowed, is because, well, if you allow it, they're going to try to do it. And when they try to do it, they're going to collide some amount of a time. So working on the skill in isolation, like with those sit-ups, I think that's fine. I think it's like teaching them, like, you know, how you head the ball without putting them in danger. So that's something that I would still consider incorporating. But yeah, so how do you think overall each movie that we're talking about, like, you know, kind of collectively, Ladybugs, Kicking and Screaming, and The Big Green, how do you think they kind of look at soccer? Do you think overall they have respect and admiration for it, or is it kind of the butt of the joke? Both?
I think... I think Ladybugs and Big Green, and a lot of this stems from the time they are. So Ladybugs is early 90s. What do we say, 93 was that one? 92, 93?
Yeah, it was like 92, I think, yeah.
Big Green's 95, and then Kicking and Screaming is 2010. So there's a huge gap in there in terms of, and a lot of, in a soccer sense, a lot of things happen in the United States regarding the sport at that point. I think it's treated... By Kicking and Screaming, I think it's treated as a serious a part of the sporting landscape, right? The fact that he doesn't make the team is a bad thing, right? He wanted to be a part of that. The kid wants to be a part of that top travel team, and that's why he can't make that. And so that's partly why why Will Ferrell gets into coaching the misfits, so to speak. Ladybugs, I think, treats it fairly seriously, although you have to caveat that with the fact that everything in that movie is a setup for a Rodney Dangerfield one-liner, which is fine. I mean, there's what was it? I was a kicker. I was a kicker on the football team. Yeah. But I think actually overall, I think it certainly the sport is an opportunity for teamwork and team development and that kind of thing. Whereas I think you get to Big Green. I think the Big Green is the one that really sort of addresses the foreignness of it sort of head on, while at the same time, he talks about as we talked about earlier, it's a foreigner who comes in and does it, who brings it to them. It is the foreign kid is the one who's good. But then again, as we said, then they go to Austin and they're all Americans, including the coach. Like there's nothing foreign about them. And in a sense, the foreign is the urban-rural divide. There's a lot, as we talk about this, it's a lot of layers to this one, actually. So I do think it's the one thinking about soccer. It treats it as foreign, and then yet you just see so many ways where it's kind of not. There's a scene where all the parents are sitting at the bar, all reading, reading issues of Soccer America.
Well, yeah, all different soccer publications, yeah.
Yeah, and so, like, this is not, in a sense, like, there is almost a sense of modernization, right? That they have been behind the times so much that they're being now brought into this sort of, they're tapped into this world, which has really kind of been all around them the whole time in a lot of ways. And so I think they treat it enters as something that's foreign, but it really kind of isn't. So, again, speaking as the American context, obviously the obvious comparison is we saw recently, or in terms of our episodes, Bend It Like Beckham, where soccer or football is the essence of Britishness. And it's partly how this Indian family is able to become part of British society, or at least the main character is, by her ability to play this very British game, as opposed to a very English game, which is a Netflix series. But, I think here in terms of speaking to your audience, I think all three of them can sort of demonstrate to you that soccer clearly has an existing place in the American sporting landscape by the time you get to the early 90s. Now, that place is limited in some ways. Ladybugs soccer is still something of a girl's sport. Although, didn't the Sun play for the
right
team that got thrown
right.
out.
That was why he was their ringer, because he was good for playing for his middle school team or whatever, and so they brought him in. Yeah,
right. But the point is, there is a pre-existing men's league as well.
Yes.
Soccer, there is a sense only that soccer is the sport for kids, right? The idea that maybe you'll eventually grow out of it, but they don't really talk. I mean, they don't really talk about that. Like, there's no. This isn't like there in a sense that keeps the focus so much on the kids, right? That there's no real talk about their future, like what they'll do from here, except to look at, Steve Gutenberg and Jay Sanders as sort of representing the things they could become. The guy who stays versus the guy who goes. But other than
I think a little bit what you also see is kind of like in the Mighty Ducks, where, you've got these kids who really have poor home lives, literally and figuratively. And this gives them something to aim for in a way, is like, well, look, like, we can be good out there on the field, in the rink, whatever it is. And I think it also kind of brought the whole town a sense of pride in this movie, right? Like, you see it with the one scene where they're starting to have their practice and it starts raining, and the adults are like, oh, come on, okay, time to end practice, let's go in. And the kids are like, no, try and get the ball from us. And like, I love that scene. It was like, first of all, yes, absolutely, kids would do that. Kids do not care about getting muddy. They do not care about getting wet. They don't care anywhere near as much as I would like them to. And the way that they drag the adults in, and the adults start having fun too. It's like, and I've been in that situation where you get to a point where you're so wet, maybe also muddy, that you just don't care anymore, and it becomes fun for you too, and you just give in to the moment. And the whole town did get drawn in. All the parents who were watching all ended up participating, and it was the very next scene where you see them all with those magazines, right, where they were getting into it. And it kind of gave the town, like we saw with the billboard at the end, it gave them, like, they had been based on a 20-year ago team. That was their identity, is like, we're the town that won the whatever championship for football like 20 years ago. This gives them a new identity.
Yeah. They won state. Listen, you're in Texas.
State, okay.
The championship is state. You won state. Again, you haven't seen Friday Night Lights, so you don't.
No, it's
we
it's
going to
foreign
state
to me. Yeah, but yeah. So this gives them something new to rally around and be proud of themselves for.
Right.
Like, so, and you even see it with the alcoholic, laid off father of the Kate, the one girl who was also good, who hadn't been playing like her whole life. Like, the father actually comes out to the game by the end, and you see like how important that is to her, that he's taking an interest in something in her life for the first time ever. Like, that was a really big part of this movie.
And I do think you see a lot of that in those kind of kids movies. There's always that one, like the dad who, for one of the players, the dad is never around and it becomes a big moment. I Mighty Ducks, the surrogate father figure, the coach was, what's the one on top of my head? Little Giants. One kid scores a touchdown because he sees his dad there, and like all of a sudden they can't tackle, the other team can't tackle him because he will not be, he just is dodging everyone, not to score, but to get to his dad who's behind the end zone. I'm going to blame Steven Spielberg for that. It's the deeper theory about all Spielberg's movies are about working out his childhood issues, and creating families after his own broke. Which I don't, obviously, as someone who had a great influence on movies, American film, but also obviously kids movies. It's said only partly in jest, to be honest. But yeah, it does seem like how they sort of bring the parents in as well, and the idea that they sort of uplift everything. But it is ultimately, I think, so much of it is sort of focused on the kids. Like, honestly, the adults, Olivia Diabo and Steve Gutenberg are just kind of not very interesting as characters, Yeah. I mean, they are set up to have a romance, right? And it just kind of, it happens, but kind of almost off scene, right? There's no later scene where, like, obviously he's hitting on her from the beginning, but like, there's no later scene where like they pour their souls out to each other or anything like that. It's just kind of, it just kind of happens. And almost off camera.
Basically, I mean, I think this movie is really focused on the kids more than the adults, and that's why, like, they don't really get any scenes at all where the kids aren't there. Also, but I think it's somewhat earned. I mean, you see how much time they're spending together. You see that, like, she was the only reason he got into this in the first place,
of course.
And I think it's not unearned, but it's not the focus of the movie. Like, it didn't bother me. It wasn't a big deal, But yeah, what you're saying is true. So a couple questions or things I wanted to point out to you. So talking about those magazines going along the bar, did you catch any of the headlines?
I didn't get a good enough look at them as they went by.
There was one that I actually paused to try and make sure I was reading it correctly, and it said MLS DOA or something like that. Now, you pointed out MLS formed what was like a year after this movie came out or something.
So when the World Cup is awarded to the U.S. in, I think it was the late 80s, there was no top-level soccer league in the U.S. The top-level soccer league was indoor soccer, which is a very different sport.
Right.
Part of the deal of awarding the World Cup to the U.S. was they had to establish a top-level professional league. And so in 1994 is when MLS, Major League Soccer, sort of incorporated. Now, they don't actually start playing until 1996. And so there's this, there's part of this interesting early gap where in retrospect, we can easily look back and say, it was fine. Financially, they were okay. But it was kind of that would have been the kind of thing you'd have a magazine piece on. Hey, is this MLS thing, is it going to work? Because remember, for a major professional American league, the only real point of reference people had was the NASL, the North American Soccer League, which had completely collapsed by the mid 80s. It just folded altogether. And MLS goes through a long stretch in kind of the early 2000s. I mean, they contracted. They got rid of several teams because they just couldn't function. For a while there, all the clubs were effectively owned by like 3 different people. Not in the sense today they are still technically a corporate entity, in that all the clubs are jointly, work together jointly under the league. But now they have individual ownership groups that actually own and operate the clubs. For a time there were only there were like 4 or 5 people who owned all of the clubs in MLS.
Right.
And so they were always facing some serious financial issues, and there's been a lot of groundwork that's been laid to sort of establish the league the way it is. And you can still see some of that. Now, I don't know enough of their finances to sit here and say, they could totally break that apart and do more things independently these days. I mean, maybe, but you can kind of understand how many of these people remember the NASL and the overextension those clubs ran into, to say nothing of some of the overextension problems we see in European leagues. We talked about the need for PSR and things like the financial regulations in those leagues. So in a sense, that's not a crazy thing. It could be an idea that the headline is a little more dramatic to draw in readership, which I'm sure is a big part of that. But yeah, the
Proto-Clickbait.
and this was dead on arrival. Remember, they haven't played a game yet. So, like, by the time when this movie comes out, they're still a year away from playing a game.
Right.
They don't have all the teams. I don't think they've even like released the logos yet. Like, I don't have all their names. Like, they've had some work to do before they finally kicked off in early '96.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to get your impression of. So do you recall, I think it was the first game that they played against the Knights. But probably the most impressive feat of athleticism you see in the entire movie comes from this kid who's getting ready to take a throw-in. And he starts off 10 to 12 paces behind the touchline, and he's got the ball overhead. He goes running, brings the ball over his head, lands on the ground on top of the ball, and does like a kick flip, landing with his feet just on the inside of a line, and then throws the ball after that. Have you ever seen such a thing done before?
I want to say I saw it somewhere in a women's game.
Okay. Oh, so it's like actually done for real?
Yeah, but it might have been maybe at the collegiate level.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so unnecessary. There's no benefit to it. It's one of those things that looks kind of cool. There's one of the things that looks kind of cool, but it's not like you're it's not like you're throwing the ball harder because of
Well,
it.
here's the thing. I think actually, so part of the reason for the rules behind a throw-in, right? Both feet need to be touching the ground and behind the line, both hands on the ball, and it has to go over your head, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's all aimed at, like, you can't just like hurl the ball like a goalkeeper would. Like, it's aimed at limiting how far, how hard you can throw the ball, right? Yeah. I do think, like, so having seen this for the first time in this movie, it was clever to me because it does follow the rules. Like, the feet are where they need to be. The ball goes over your head with both hands on it. Right. It's a legal throw. And I do think that having the extra oomph of like the spinning motion probably could get like a little more distance. Like, I could see it for a long throw where like you're near the corner and trying to like score off of it or something like that. Right. But I think the key downside where that wouldn't be good in most real life situations is as you're coming around, you are aiming that ball while your head is like being brought to bear and you're not going to have almost any accuracy on it at all would be the biggest problem with it. But
well, I mean, remember that for most throw-ins, the point is to quickly get the ball back into the field of play,
right?
Or sometimes you see teams run plays, or you have this, the sort of the long throw and the set piece. But remember, also you need a fair amount of room to do that kind of thing. And look at the way most of these stadiums are set up. You don't have that kind of space.
No, that's true.
So even the logistics of pulling it off, and also, I mean, the amount of extra oomph you'd get from sort of the momentum of it coming around. Look, I'm not a physicist, I'm not a scientist, but like to me, it just feels so marginal at best, because you're also losing a little bit of momentum as you like pull yourself back up. I mean, think about the distribution of weight and everything. Like, I don't think you'd actually get anything extra that you couldn't get just by doing a traditional run up and heaving it as hard as you can. To me, that just seems it's so marginal. As to, I mean, again, like Mikel Arteta is famous for like seeking marginal edges and those kinds of things, as are many coaches at that level of the game, and yet you don't see any of that at all. I think mostly it's a space thing, but also just like it's also not the easiest thing in the world to do. Just do a flip like that. That's actually can be quite difficult, and if you screw up, I mean, it's aside from being really embarrassing, it's also it just feels to me it's not worth it. Like there's no the benefit you get from it doesn't counteract the potential ways it could go wrong.
Yeah.
Or also you throw it in, you're trying to pick yourself up when really your job is run back on the field and get back into play.
Right. Yeah, no, that's true. So a little bit of trivia. This was written and directed by Holly Goldberg Sloan, who did also co-write Angels in the Outfield, by the way. This was the first live action Disney movie to be directed by a woman. And what was kind of funny, because I thought there's a lot of clever lines of dialogue. Like there were a bunch that had me laughing throughout this movie. I mean, just like, we're not the nothings from nowhere, we're the nothings from Elma. Or when she's trying to tell them about how to get in shape, you need to run 2 hours, like for a soccer match or whatever. And she's having Sheriff Tom go run with him. She says, well, it looks like you've had one plate of nachos too many, right? She says something like that to him. Apparently, Steve Guttenberg actually gained 12 pounds for this role. This is according to IMDb trivia, so maybe it's a little bit of a questionable source, but that's interesting. I didn't think of him as that type of actor who would commit to a role like that.
I guess I'm not. I mean, was the 12 pounds just in service of the nacho joke? I mean,
no, or just being a former football player but not currently in good shape. I think just kind of that maybe.
I guess. Yeah. I mean.
So, one thing we talked about doing before the show, and I think we'll give it a shot. And if you're hearing this, we thought it turned out okay. And if you never hear it, it's because it went horribly wrong, and we cut it out, and it'll never see the light of day. But I'm going to ask you first, Keith, since you're the one who came up with this idea. If this movie were, let's say, a current or former Arsenal player, which one would it be?
Oh gosh, which Arsenal player is this movie? So I thought about this a little bit, and I'm trying to, as someone who kind of suffers in comparison because of the era in which he played, And yet I think we remember a little bit more fondly as time has gone on. So I'm going to say Granit Xhaka,
Okay.
who is sort of a central figure of, we'll say, one of the weaker periods of Arsenal in the last couple of decades. Was certainly during his time was the figure definitely faced a fair amount of mockery and derision. Some of it deserved, but not all of it. But by and large, was always a good servant of the club, a good teammate, and sometimes not quite where you would want him to be in terms of the ambitions of the club. But I think someone we can look back on, especially thinking about when he left the club, sort of general positive feelings. I mean, it was time to go, obviously, but at the same time, we can walk away feeling good about where he had taken the team and where the team was after having left. Because of its era, the Big Green kind of suffers in comparison to the kids/family movies of the period. But at the same time, Xhaka somewhat suffers because of the poor stretch that Arsenal went through, and yet someone who's, I think, a little more fond with the memory of it, whom was a little more fonder than we thought at the time.
Sure. So for me, I'm obviously, I've got a lot less depth in the Arsenal roster to draw from. My experience is really limited heavily to the last few seasons. But having thought about it a little bit, I guess I would say Kai Havertz, because he scores more often than he looks like he should, kind of in a lot of ways. I think I didn't expect a lot from this movie going in, but it surprised me over and over again, and I like it. I would revisit it.
I suppose then if we're talking about came in with low expectations and exceeded those modest expectations, we could say a Mikel Merino.
Yeah, in the same vein,
scoring goals is not what we expected from him, but anyway.
Right. Yeah. So kind of answering, let's go back to something we brought up toward the beginning: family movie versus kids movie. What do you think of a distinction between those two?
I guess to me, it's partly a question of audience, and it's kind of like, as I was talking before, it kind of came to me that it is a distinction. I feel like a family movie is one that's designed to be watched with parents there with the kids. Like a kids movie is designed for children. It is there for them. It's, I hate to say surface level, but there's not meant to be anything necessarily talked about. There's not supposed to start any kind of conversation. It's just sort of it exists entirely surface level. I think a family movie kind of opens the possibility. There are things in there that are, if not directed towards the parents, at least the kind of thing a parent will see differently than the children will. And in some families that means they're going to start talking about it afterwards, or parents will ask questions, or kids will ask questions, and maybe that doesn't happen, But I think the idea is there are parts of the movie that are supposed to speak to the parents, and I think we could talk about like the scene in the rain the practice in the rain. I think is one that parents are going to look at and watch a little bit differently than the kids will, both in a positive way. But I think it's even though so much of it is focused on the kids, to me, it's not a kids movie. I think that is kind of a distinction, and I think it's one that I would recommend in a family setting. I mean, kids could watch it without their parents; it'd be totally fine. There's nothing that needs an explanation. There's no mature themes that need explanation, kind of a thing. But I think there is a kind of thing where parents can watch it and not necessarily just sit on their phones because there's nothing here for them.
Right. Yeah, I guess so. I very often do use the terms interchangeably.
Yeah.
I might call this movie either or and not really think much of it. But if I have in the past thought about that distinction a lot, and I guess I would kind of summarize it in looking at Pixar compared to DreamWorks, for instance, where to me, Pixar movies are family movies, and a lot of Drek that's turned out by other animation studios kind of emblematic, whatever, emblazoned.
Is emblematic of.
Like represented by DreamWorks and other similar, kind of second tier animation studios. Those other places are making drivel they don't expect a grown-up to ever care about and choose to watch willingly. Right? It's like pandering to kids. It'll have lots of silly, stupid jokes that aren't elevated, and, things that grown-ups will roll their eyes at and be looking at their watch the whole time if they
Mm-hmm.
somehow make it into a movie theater to see the movie or something, right? Versus Pixar, to me, has always excelled at making movies that have a range where it's something that a whole family can enjoy, but it doesn't pander. It's the level of pandering to me is what really differentiates it. Like I was a big fan of Pixar like as a kid, but continuing into adulthood and for many years before I had kids, I would still see Pixar movies in the theater just because I love them that much. And they very rarely disappointed. So with that in mind, I mean, this definitely to me is a family movie. Like, there are silly moments, but it's nothing that an adult wouldn't enjoy just taken on its own. It's just, it doesn't have some of the hard edges of like a Ladybugs, which was very much like not a family movie.
That was it. That was a. Yeah.
So like, I don't think there was any swearing in this. I think they may have said before the movie started, like harsh language or something like that my son jokingly pointed out to me. I think someone said the word damn at one point or
Probably,
something like that. And he's crazy with pointing out what he perceives to be swear words. But yeah, like this was very much like not to me like the bad kind of kids movie,
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And look, there's a place in the world for kids movies that don't have a lot of depth and are just they're sound and fury signifying nothing, but that's fine. Sometimes the kids need something that's theirs and doesn't have that layer, but I think this one potentially does.
Sort of. I think part of the tragedy of movies like that is that kids literally have no taste. And I don't mean that they have bad taste. I mean, just literally they have no taste. It takes time to develop taste. And the things that they watch are how they develop that taste. And when they watch like Happy Feet, like like kids will like almost anything that they watch. The more it panders to them, the more they're going to love it. Yeah. But it's like, is that what you want them learning to love?
Yeah, but but I do think, and I'm thinking of this in the context. So also this past week, for various reasons we don't need to get into, I also watched a movie from the same period, Cool Runnings.
Oh, I wanted to see that again.
And Cool Runnings is, I would also say, a family movie. I mean, they're not kids. There are no kids in it. I mean, there's a couple like bit parts, but like for the most part, they're adults. But I mean, the language is clean. They don't do anything that I think they swear a couple of times, but they don't do anything that's like, like offensive or something you'd have to cover their eyes. They don't have to see this. It's PG. And I feel like it's kind of I know people lament about like how the movies have declined and all that, but it does feel like there's sort of this empty space. Just like, it's not the kind of movie you would see of that kind of quality. You'd see movies that aspire to that, but they just don't have the same. There's a real quality to it, and same with The Big Green. Even as or some of these others in this era, they're family friendly, and that there's a complexity to them. But at the same time, you can take them just as they are. Like, you can watch The Big Green. It's just a sports movie where the kids are bad and they learn about themselves. They overcome adversity and they win the championship. In that sense, it's a very simple story. But there are a lot of other things going on there that you can think about. I think I kind of joking about there being layers to it, but there kind of are a little bit. And I think that's kind of it's kind of missing. The complaint is that movies tend to fall into two categories. Either they're superhero movies, big budgets, loud noises, or they're the, super complicated, independent film, where everything's, shot on film as opposed to digital and is overacted and all of that. So, and that's not entirely true. I know I'm talking to the movie guy, but, where is Cool Runnings? Where is the 2025 Cool Runnings? I ask you, sir.
Well, I think part of the answer to that is somewhere on Netflix, probably. It's like we've fractured our audience where there aren't that many movies that just everybody goes out and sees like there used to be. Just like there aren't TV shows that like everybody is watching. It's like everybody kind of chooses their own adventure a lot more. There's like millions of movies coming out every year, and you find the one that is good for you, and maybe it's not good for your next door neighbor in the same way that a Cool Runnings was,
All right, let's start to move into the judgmental part of the real judgmental part of the show. What were the best and worst, or perhaps your favorite and least favorite parts of The Big Green?
Yeah, so when we do this, I try not to use the word parts because that implies like a scene or something like that. So like as far as aspect, now I'm going to say that, and then of course my favorite part actually is a scene in the movie this time around. It works out that way. But no, what I liked the most about The Big Green was definitely that scene we talked about in the rain, in the mud. I thought that was kind of the heart of the movie. I thought it was well done, relatable, serves a narrative purpose, and was fun. And it was really good. Something that I will probably revisit and think of from this movie looking back at it in the future. As far as my least favorite aspect of it, I mean, there weren't any really obvious things that I didn't like. I thought all the cast was pretty good. You know, there were some silly things that were done like just to drive a story that weren't realistic, and you know, you can nitpick almost anything, but you know, once it gets going, it's pretty good. I'd say that the only thing that really stands out that I just wish they had left on the cutting room floor entirely was the little bits of CGI that they sprinkled in at the very beginning and then a couple times in the middle, just to kind of bring you up to speed on what their standings were, and that, okay, now this is going to be the final match. Like, that was completely unnecessary. We would have very quickly been able to determine that this was the final match. Like, it was mentioned by multiple characters on screen that this was the final match between these two teams. We didn't need an animated goat to scratch like with a chalkboard or whatever and tell us that it was going to be the final. So that really bothered me. And it was the kind of thing in the beginning where I was thinking, oh God, this is going to be really bad. And it wasn't, but it made me think that. So CGI. Of course, it was 1995. They felt like they had to do it, but
gotta stick it in. Gotta get it in there.
So what about for you? Have you come up with most favorite and least favorite aspects?
My most bestest favorite. I think my favorite thing for me, it sounds like an insult, but it's really not. I think it's kind of the degree they underplaying the cartoonishness of the villains. They can be very easy to make Jay Sanders kind of that stop at nothing to win kind of coaches, you know, who's like every representative of everything that's wrong with youth sports, for the Knights to be sort of they have them be dirty and overly physical, and they're not. They're just good. I mean, they have a few insults they lob at the other kids, but like there's nothing like nothing like that crazy there. I mean, at that point, you almost want to say that to them yourselves. And even then, I think what it does is, we talked about this, there isn't a villain per se. In a sense, the kids are their own villains. The town is its own villain. It sort of refuses to get out of its own way, and you know, it's sort of like that question that she asks them at the beginning of the kids at the beginning of the movie. What makes you special? And they kind of have to come to the realization that there is something special about that. You know, it isn't necessarily something extrinsic that makes them special. It's intrinsic, that they discover this thing that they can do and be good at and have pride in. And so I think they don't make the villain, the Knights, the bad guys, overly cartoonish. Again, even the coach it's not that bad. He's kind of a jerk and condescending, but to the other parents mostly, or to Steve Guttenberg. So, you know, I think it did help keep the focus on the kids, which I think was good.
Yeah, no, it's a good shout. So what did you like the least?
It's sort of in yours. It was sort of more of like a production thing. They had a handful of moments early on in the movie where they suddenly sped up the film, and they did that sort of, you know, everything moves really fast and running in place. And it just felt so unnecessary, you know? Like, I get the idea that you increase the speed, it creates that kind of zany thing, and the music kind of matches, but I don't think they really match the tone of the rest of the movie. And that was kind of one of those, as I remember that, I didn't remember that. And I was like, oh, this movie not as good as I thought. And then they got away from it. It's like, oh, this is actually, there's some good stuff in here. And so I think that was one that, especially early on, I was like, oh no, what have I done? What did I do this?
I wonder if that serves kind of like the opposite purpose of the effect it had on both of us. Like, so for you, it was thinking, is this not as good as I remember? For me, it was, is this as bad as it looked like it was going to be. But I wonder if for kids with their butts in seats in the theaters back in 1995, if that was getting them on board saying, oh boy, this is going to be awesome. It's got the super sped up motion that I find so funny. Like, I wonder if it was something like that.
I mean, it could be. I guess that makes sense. But I just didn't. Yeah, I mean, the more I think about it, like even the complaints I have, or maybe some plot lines that maybe feel slightly undercooked. But like we've talked about, anytime you have one of these kids' movies with it's something of an ensemble cast, you're going to lose different parts of the story. And so, like, there was nothing in there that felt like, hey, where did that go? They didn't close the loop on that story. I don't know what's happening right now. It wasn't that intricately constructed that it needed everybody's story wrapped up. Some of them were just kind of fine. They were just kind of left, and that was okay.
Yeah, no, that's true. All right. Any closing thoughts?
Just once again, my appreciation for taking me back to the 90s. And in the end, enjoying something better than I remember, which is always a pleasant, really to be pleasantly surprised with something.
Yeah. It's one that, I could see rewatching in a couple years when Reed gets a little bit older. I think it's something that, I'll look forward to seeing again. And I think probably watching Ladybugs with him for the first time, maybe not too long after that. Thanks for joining us at Gooner U Film Studies. If you're watching on YouTube, you can also listen to our show on Apple, Spotify, and some other places. If you're only listening, try watching us on YouTube with a link in the show notes. Your homework for today is to comment on a video, either this one or one of this week's shorts. We record the show using Zencaster. If you'd like to try it out, you can support Gooner U by signing up using the link in the description, which also has links to everything we talked about and our social pages. Again, my name is Dove, and you can find me on Twitter at Dove Frankel. With me, as always, is Keith, and you can find him in a pub watching Arsenal matches and movies.
Texas Forever Street.